An American hero died this morning, one who brought honor to his state, his country, and his faith. I'm talking about former Alabama Senator Jeremiah Denton.
Imagine being a prisoner of war, your every move watched, every word monitored.
Is they don't have to do anything.
Quiet! Be quiet! No talk!
Now picture in this high-stakes game of survival, transmitting a secret message right under your captor's noses.
He, over and over again, torture. That's what he's sending. A message to us.
This is the story of Jeremiah Denton, an American POW in Vietnam, who turned a routine interview into an extraordinary act of covert communication. It's a tale of endurance, wit, and a blink that echoed across continents.
I get adequate food and adequate clothing and medical care when I require it.
Offering a rare glimpse into the clandestine world of wartime signals. The capture and early days of captivity. The saga of Jeremiah Denton's captivity began on a day that seemed like any other in the tumultuous skies of Vietnam. On July 18, 1965, Denton, then a U.S. Navy pilot, led a bombing mission over North Vietnam.
Well, we were hit immediately upon bomb release. Good possibility it was our own bombs going off. That's another story.
The mission, a part of the escalating U.S. military involvement in the Vietnam War, was to target the Thanh Hoa Bridge, a critical supply route for the North Vietnamese. However, fate had a different plan. Denton's plane was shot down, and he parachuted into enemy territory, landing in the hands of the North Vietnamese army. The capture of an American pilot was a significant prize for the North Vietnamese. Denton, a man trained to withstand adversity and maintain secrecy, was immediately subjected to a grueling regimen of interrogation and torture. Moved from one prison to another, he found himself in the infamous Hanoi Hilton, a name sarcastically given by American POWs to the Hoa Lo prison. In the early days of his captivity, Denton faced a barrage of psychological and physical torments designed to break his spirit and extract valuable information. The prison, known for its harsh conditions, was a place where light and hope seemed to fade away. Denton, like many of his fellow captives, was kept in solitary confinement, a tactic aimed at fostering a sense of isolation and hopelessness. The cell was rudimentary, with barely enough space to move, let alone find comfort. But Denton's spirit remained unbroken. He quickly adapted to the harsh conditions, demonstrating an indomitable will that would become his trademark throughout his captivity. Food was scarce and often barely edible, a deliberate tactic to weaken the prisoners physically and mentally. Despite the hunger and the constant threat of physical harm, Denton maintained a semblance of dignity and resolve. Interrogations were a regular occurrence. The North Vietnamese sought information about U.S. military operations, hoping to gain an advantage in the ongoing conflict. Denton, bound by the military code of conduct, provided only his name, rank, service number, and date of birth.
15 July 1924, Commander 485087. What kind of plane were you flying?
This defiance was met with increased brutality. The methods of torture were diverse and cruel, ranging from beatings and electric shocks to more psychological forms of torture, such as mock executions and withholding of medical treatment. Communication with fellow POWs became a lifeline for Denton and others. Despite the risk of severe punishment, they developed a covert tap code, a simple yet effective way to communicate through the walls of their cells. This system not only allowed them to share vital information, but also provided much-needed emotional support. The solidarity and camaraderie among the prisoners, fostered through these secret messages, were crucial in maintaining their morale. As the days turned into months and months into years, Denton's resolve only grew stronger. He became a symbol of resistance within the prison, often taking the lead in organizing acts of defiance against their captors. This leadership did not go unnoticed by the North Vietnamese, who singled him out for particularly harsh treatment. One of the most significant moments during Denton's early captivity came when he was forced to participate in a propaganda video. The North Vietnamese wanted to use Denton to convey a message to the world that American POWs were being treated well. Unbeknownst to his captors, this would become the stage for one of the most ingenious acts of silent resistance in military history. The interview. A stage for subterfuge. The interview, set against the backdrop of the Vietnam War's grim reality, was not just a mere interaction between a journalist and a prisoner. It was a carefully orchestrated propaganda tool for the North Vietnamese. Jeremiah Denton, who had been enduring relentless torture and isolation, was now thrust into a role that was as perilous as it was critical. The day of the interview arrived with a heavy air of expectation. Denton was led to a makeshift studio, a room starkly contrasting the dark confines of his cell. The setting was deliberately arranged to project an image of humane treatment. There was a simple stool, a table with a glass of water, and a microphone, all under the glaring lights of the camera equipment. The Japanese journalist, unaware of the true conditions of Denton's imprisonment, was ready to begin. Denton, gaunt and weary from his prolonged ordeal, was a shadow of his former self. His captors had ensured he was presentable for the camera, but no amount of grooming could hide the toll that months of abuse had taken on him. He was instructed to stick to the script, a narrative that suggested fair treatment and compliance with international norms of war.
My name is Ito Komura. I am a reporter with the Japanese news service. I am going to ask you some questions. The camera will be operating, and you should please answer truthfully.
The interview began, and Denton was asked standard questions about his treatment and thoughts on the war. To an untrained observer, it might have seemed like a routine prisoner of war interview. But for Denton, this was a rare opportunity to communicate with the outside world, particularly with U.S. intelligence. As the interview progressed, Denton started to blink erratically. To the casual observer, his blinking might have appeared as a mere reaction to the bright lights or a symptom of his weakened state. However, to those versed in Morse code, it was a deliberate and risky act of defiance. With each blink, Denton was spelling out a covert message. T-O-R-T-U-R-E.
U R E. Over and over again. Torture. That's what he's sending. A message to us.
It was a simple yet profound message, one that shattered the facade the North Vietnamese were attempting to uphold. This act of blinking in Morse code was not only ingenious but also incredibly dangerous. If his captors had realized what he was doing, the consequences would have been severe. Denton was acutely aware of the risk, but the imperative to inform the world about the true nature of the POW's treatment outweighed the personal danger he faced. Denton's message was a masterstroke of subterfuge. It was a moment of silent rebellion, a subtle yet powerful way of using the enemy's platform against them. He managed to maintain his composure throughout the interview, answering questions in a manner that did not arouse suspicion. He stuck to the script, all while sending a distress signal in plain sight. The interview ended without incident, and Denton was returned to his cell, unaware of the impact his message would have. It wasn't until later that the significance of his actions came to light. The footage was broadcast and eventually made its way to U.S. intelligence agencies, where experts deciphered the Morse code message. For the first time, there was concrete proof that American prisoners were being tortured in North Vietnamese prisons. Denton's coded message had far-reaching implications. It provided the U.S. government and the public with a glimpse into the harsh realities faced by POWs in Vietnam. It also served as a morale booster for the American forces and their families, who were desperate for any news about their loved ones held captive. Furthermore, the revelation of Denton's message put the North Vietnamese under international scrutiny. It challenged the propaganda narrative they had been trying to sell to the world and exposed the brutal treatment of prisoners, a violation of the Geneva Conventions. In hindsight, Denton's interview was more than just an act of personal bravery. It was a strategic move in the larger psychological warfare of the Vietnam conflict. It underscored the resilience and resourcefulness of POWs in the face of extreme adversity. Morse code blinking, a coded cry for help. In the stark, artificially lit room where Jeremiah Denton sat for his interview, a battle of wits was silently waged.
I don't really know what's going on.
The unsuspecting journalist and the North Vietnamese officials saw only a frail prisoner, but beneath this veneer, Denton was executing a daring plan. His weapon? A series of blinks, seemingly innocuous yet laden with a desperate message conveyed in Morse code. To understand the gravity of Denton's actions, one must first appreciate the nuances of Morse code. This method of communication, developed in the 19th century, had long been a staple in military and nautical communications. It encodes text characters as standardized sequences of two different signal durations called dots and dashes. In the confines of his prison, and under the watchful eyes of his captors, Denton had no access to traditional methods of sending Morse code, such as a telegraph or a light signal. His only option was to use his body as a transmitter, with his eyelids serving as the key for sending dots and dashes. As the interview commenced, Denton, understanding the potential reach of his televised appearance, decided to blink the word torture in Morse code. Each blink, each subtle movement of his eyelids was a carefully calculated risk. The word torture in Morse code is represented as APA, a sequence of dashes and dots that Denton had to blink accurately for his message to be understood. The ingenuity of this method lay in its simplicity and the audacity of its execution. Morse code, though known to many military personnel, was not something the North Vietnamese captors were likely to recognize, especially when transmitted in such an unorthodox manner. By blinking Morse code, Denton turned a weakness, his visibility and exposure, into a strength. The physical act of blinking the message was fraught with challenges. Denton had to maintain a rhythm and accuracy that would be recognizable to those familiar with Morse code, all while under the intense pressure of the interview and the scrutiny of his captors. His ability to modulate his blinking, to embed a covert message within what appeared to be a natural physical reaction to the bright lights of the camera, was a testament to his mental fortitude and his training. The message itself was a calculated gamble. By blinking torture, Denton not only communicated the plight of American POWs, but also took a significant personal risk. If his captors had realized what he was doing, the consequences could have been dire. Yet in this moment of extreme pressure, Denton's commitment to his fellow prisoners and his duty as a military officer outweighed the personal risk. The impact of Denton's Morse code message was profound. Once the footage was analyzed and the message decoded, it sent shockwaves through the U.S. intelligence community and the American public. For the first time, there was undeniable proof that American POWs in Vietnam were being subjected to torture. This revelation had significant strategic implications. It validated the concerns and suspicions about the treatment of American prisoners and galvanized public opinion against the North Vietnamese. Moreover, Denton's actions had a powerful psychological impact on both sides of the war. For the American military and the public, it was a moment of profound inspiration and pride. It demonstrated the resilience, ingenuity, and defiance of American POWs under unimaginable conditions. For the North Vietnamese, it was a stark revelation of their underestimation of the American prisoners' resolve and resourcefulness. In the broader context of the Vietnam War, Denton's blinking Morse code served as a microcosm of the larger conflict, a battle not just of arms, but of wits, willpower, and the human spirit. It underscored the complex interplay of warfare, propaganda, and intelligence in a deeply polarized and contentious conflict. Life in captivity, survival, and resistance. Jeremiah Denton's life in captivity in the notorious prisons of North Vietnam was a saga of endurance, resilience, and unyielding resistance. In these harrowing confines, where the specter of death loomed large, Denton's spirit of defiance and his commitment to survival and resistance against his captors shone brightly. The physical conditions of captivity were brutal. The cells in prisons like the Hanoi Hilton were small, damp, and dark, designed to break the spirits of the prisoners. The basic necessities of life were provided sparingly. Food was scarce, often limited to a few spoonfuls of a watery soup with little nutritional value and occasional servings of stale bread or rice. These conditions led to severe malnutrition, making prisoners susceptible to a host of diseases and infections. Physical torture was a common and frequent occurrence. The methods employed by the North Vietnamese were diverse and cruel. They included beatings, water torture, and the use of ropes and irons to contort the body in painful positions for extended periods. Despite this, Denton and his fellow POWs showed incredible fortitude. They endured the pain and suffering with a stoic resolve, often using humor and internal strength to cope with the physical and psychological torment. One of the key elements of survival for Denton and other POWs was maintaining a sense of unity and purpose. Communication among prisoners was strictly forbidden, yet they developed ingenious methods to stay in touch. The tap code, a simple and effective way to communicate through the walls of their cells by tapping on them, became an essential tool. This code allowed them to exchange information, provide moral support, and maintain a chain of command. The ability to communicate, even in the most basic form, was a vital lifeline and a significant act of defiance against their captors. Denton's leadership qualities were evident even in captivity. He played a crucial role in organizing a unified resistance among the prisoners. This resistance took many forms, from refusing to provide information beyond their name, rank, service number, and date of birth, to more overt acts of defiance, like resisting participation in propaganda efforts. Denton's ability to inspire and lead was a source of strength for many of his fellow prisoners. Religion and personal faith also played a critical role in Denton's survival strategy. For many POWs, faith provided a source of comfort and hope amidst the despair of captivity. Denton, a devout Catholic, drew strength from his religious beliefs. The practice of religion, whether through silent prayer or shared faith, was an act of resistance in itself, a declaration of personal autonomy and spiritual freedom in a situation where almost everything else was controlled. Psychological resilience was just as crucial as physical endurance. Denton and his fellow POWs faced a constant battle against despair and hopelessness. They combated this by recalling memories of their families, their homes, and their reasons for serving their country. These memories served as a beacon of hope, a reminder that there was a world beyond the prison walls worth surviving for. The solidarity among the prisoners was remarkable. They looked out for each other, shared their rations, and provided medical care to the best of their abilities. This camaraderie was a testament to the human capacity for empathy and selflessness in the most challenging circumstances. The news of Denton's Morse code message and its international impact also reached the POW community, albeit slowly. This news provided a significant morale boost. It was a validation of their collective resistance and a reminder that their sacrifices and struggles were not in vain. The war beyond the prison walls. While Jeremiah Denton and his fellow prisoners of war, POWs, faced their battles within the grim confines of North Vietnamese prisons, a larger and equally complex conflict raged beyond the prison walls. The Vietnam War, a protracted and controversial conflict, shaped the geopolitical landscape of the time and left an indelible mark on the generations that lived through it. The war in Vietnam, which began in the 1950s and escalated in the 1960s, was more than a fight over territory or ideology. It was a manifestation of the Cold War tensions, a struggle between the communist forces of North Vietnam, supported by the Soviet Union and China, and the non-communist South Vietnam, backed by the United States and other anti-communist allies. The U.S. involvement in Vietnam was driven by the desire to contain the spread of communism, a policy known as the domino theory. The war was characterized by its asymmetry. The United States, with its superior military technology and vast resources, faced an enemy that employed guerrilla tactics and had an intimate knowledge of the local terrain. The North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong guerrillas used ambushes, booby traps, and a complex network of tunnels to counter the American firepower. This unconventional warfare, coupled with the challenging geography of Vietnam, dense jungles, made the conflict particularly arduous and bloody. One of the most significant aspects of the Vietnam War was its impact on civilian populations. The war saw widespread use of napalm and Agent Orange, chemicals used by U.S. forces to defoliate forests and destroy enemy cover.
It was one way we were going to win the Vietnam War, dump herbicides all over the jungle so the Viet Cong...
These substances had devastating effects on both the environment and the health of the Vietnamese people, consequences that would linger for decades. The heavy bombardment and ground battles led to a high number of civilian casualties and created millions of refugees, further exacerbating the humanitarian crisis in the region. Back home in the United States, the war sparked widespread controversy and dissent. It was the first war to be extensively televised, bringing the brutal realities of combat into American living rooms. The graphic coverage of the war, showing wounded and dead soldiers and the suffering of Vietnamese civilians, fueled anti-war sentiment and led to massive protests, especially among the youth and student populations. The war raised profound questions about U.S. foreign policy, military ethics, and the role of the media in shaping public opinion. For the American soldiers fighting in Vietnam, the war was a challenging and often disorienting experience. Many were drafted through a selective service system, leading to a sense of resentment and disillusionment. The guerrilla tactics of the Viet Cong, the unclear objectives, and the ambiguous nature of the enemy contributed to a feeling of frustration and futility among the troops. This sentiment was compounded by the growing anti-war movement back home, leaving many soldiers feeling alienated and unsupported. The Vietnam War also had significant implications for international relations. It strained the United States' relations with its allies and heightened tensions with the Soviet Union and China. The conflict became a focal point of global attention, influencing political and military strategies worldwide. In the context of the POW's experience, the broader developments of the Vietnam War played a crucial role. The ongoing conflict influenced the treatment of American prisoners as they became pawns in a larger political and ideological struggle. The prisoners' ordeals and their acts of resistance, like Denton's Morse code message, gained significance against the backdrop of the war's complexities and controversies. Denton's eventual release, along with other American POWs, came as part of the Paris Peace Accords in 1973. Which led to the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Vietnam. The return of the POWs was a poignant moment, a symbol of the end of a long and divisive conflict. However, the legacy of the Vietnam War continued to influence American politics, society, and foreign policy for decades. The unbreakable spirit, resilience beyond captivity. After years of enduring the harrowing conditions of North Vietnamese prisons, the resilience and unyielding spirit of Jeremiah Denton and his fellow POWs continued to be a beacon of hope and inspiration, not only during their time in captivity, but long after their release. Jeremiah Denton's release in February 1973 as part of the Paris Peace Accords marked the end of a grueling 7 years and 7 months in captivity. Stepping back onto American soil, Denton and his fellow former prisoners faced the immense challenge of reintegration into a society that had undergone significant changes during their years of absence. The America they returned to was markedly different from the one they had left. It was a nation deeply scarred and divided by the Vietnam War. The physical and psychological scars of their prolonged imprisonment posed significant challenges. Many former POWs, including Denton, suffered from a range of health issues resulting from malnutrition, injuries sustained from torture, and the general lack of medical care during captivity. Psychologically, the impact of isolation, stress, and the constant fear of torture left deep-seated effects. That would take years, if not a lifetime, to heal. Conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, anxiety, and depression were common among the returned POWs. Despite these challenges, Denton and many of his fellow former POWs demonstrated remarkable resilience. They embarked on a journey of recovery, leaning on the support of their families, fellow veterans, and a nation that received them as heroes. The process of healing and adaptation was slow and often painful, involving both physical rehabilitation and psychological counseling. Denton's unbreakable spirit shone through as he turned his harrowing experiences into a source of strength and advocacy. He became a vocal advocate for POWs and veterans, sharing his story and those of his fellow captives to raise awareness about the sacrifices and challenges faced by military personnel. His experiences in captivity, particularly his leadership and resistance, made him a symbol of courage and resilience, inspiring not only fellow veterans, but also the wider public. In a remarkable turn of events, Denton chose to continue serving his country, this time in a different capacity. He ventured into politics, driven by a desire to contribute to the nation that he had so valiantly served. In 1980, Denton was elected as a U.S. Senator from Alabama, becoming the first retired admiral in the history of the United States to be elected to the Senate. His political career was marked by a focus on national security, military issues, and veterans' rights, areas deeply influenced by his experiences in Vietnam. Denton's advocacy extended to writing and public speaking. He authored a book titled When Hell Was in Session, chronicling his experiences in the Vietnamese POW camps. The book provided a candid and compelling account of the challenges faced by American POWs, offering insights into their resilience, ingenuity, and camaraderie. Through his writings and speeches, Denton continued to highlight the plight of those who serve in the military, emphasizing the need for national unity and support for service members. The legacy of Denton and his fellow former POWs also had a significant impact on military training and policy. Their experiences contributed to the refinement of the U.S. military's survival, evasion, resistance, and escape SEER training programs. These programs are designed to prepare military personnel for the possibility of capture, teaching them survival skills and resistance techniques to withstand enemy interrogation and torture. Denton's story, particularly his use of Morse code to communicate torture, became a part of the curriculum, serving as a powerful example of resistance and ingenuity under extreme conditions.